There's a lot to address with this film, so let's just do it. I love the idea of viewing Revenge of the Sith as if it were the sole Star Wars prequel. Once one imagines this to be the case, it ceases to be the inconsistent continuation of a wildly fluctuating and out of control haphazard film trilogy, and instead this sole, complex, ambitious, adventurous, explorative, and completely unique film experience, totally removed from being a successor to The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. And this is, somewhat, how I first viewed the film. I saw this in a cinema at age 9 or 10. I had seen The Phantom Menace when I was small, but barely registered its plot, and so its coherence with the eventual Revenge of the Sith, and Attack of the Clones I'd only seen fragments of prior. I had seen the original trilogy, as these were easy to tape off of the television. They aired frequently enough. So watching Revenge of the Sith with only the content of the film to work with, it was a saga of a scared man, fearful of his wife's death, feeling alienated by his Jedi brothers and sisters. He seeks a solace in a seemingly kind, listening old man, the Chancellor of the Galactic Republic, whom the Jedi Council are losing trust in. I was at once in an understanding with the Council, but sympathised with Anakin's concerns. Yoda talks in riddles, Mace Windu knows him at his worst, and he appears to want to keep a composure around his greatest friend, his master Obi-Wan Kenobi. Meanwhile, violent conflicts sprout around the galaxy, a fierce battle in space, and then Anakin and Obi-Wan, and R2-D2, I certainly knew him, are up against a menacing Sith Lord. They find their way through this large spaceship, escape from the bridge of the wicked General Grievous, and they then crash land on the enormous city planet Coruscant as General Grievous escapes again. Then we have vivid battles on the Wookiee planet Kashyyyk. Obi-Wan duels the heavily marketed General Grievous on Utapau, featuring our Bruce Spence. Mace Windu and 3 other Jedi Masters, Kit Fisto, Saesee Tiin, and Aegon Kolar are killed by Chancellor Palpatine / Darth Sidious. Then Anakin goes and slaughters the Jedi Temple, including some children. Imagine us on the playground talking about how Anakin kills kids in the new Star Wars movie. The whole Order 66 thing occurs, they even kill off a slew of Wookiees, not cool, we all love Chewbacca. Until finally, as Anakin and Obi-Wan battle again amongst the volcanoes of Mustafar, Yoda and Palpatine duel amongst the Galactic Senate, its function finally revealed. I really hope Lucas had intended for this duel from the moment he devised the floating Galactic Senate pods for the Phantom Menace. Honestly, it's a decent way to incorporate a metaphor, obvious perhaps, into an entertaining action set piece. It's a wild flick. Forget about a continuing green screen abundance with Anakin / Padme silliness, and take it for what it is. You might find that you actually choose to accept or even appreciate these elements if you imagine them being introduced for the first time in Revenge of the Sith, rather than continuing on from the previous, in my opinion, overall uneven or failed experiments of the Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. I find, very unfortunately, the Phantom Menace to be abundant with 90s Disney pandering annoyances. In between some amazing feats of cinema technology, it is really disappointing that it is the way it is, and not because it is all bad, but because so much of it appears to be working, or could be working if it fit in better with the rest of the film around it. Attack of the Clones is a schizoid reaction to the negative reception which the Phantom Menace received. A total mess, although a stylistic prototype, a necessary adolescence for the subsequent Revenge of the Sith. Now, not giving a damn, George Lucas tries to pull off his operatic, politically astute, so he wants it, ruthless and tragic, technologically futurist, and all-encompassing cultural event. One of the definitive, dissect everything he is doing, this is his last work and final composition, most be-all end-all statements in the history of film production. Now, Revenge of the Sith, and the prequels in general, have been really mutilated by the Mike Class and Mr. Plinkett reviews, and yes, he truly scaves these film screenplays, and even in Revenge of the Sith, certainly insofar as it represents a conclusion to an established storyline, there are many warranted screenplay criticisms and acting criticisms to be made. Yes, it does seem ludicrous that the Dark Lord of the Sith would disguise themselves as the Chancellor of the Galactic Republic in order to ensure their place as Emperor upon his founding of the Galactic Empire, in order to line up with the original trilogy's narrative. It did work, though. Just seeing it play out as a historical event is kind of odd, I don't know. I mean, the Jedi must really think that they were idiots, right? Now, the original Star Wars trilogy is not screenplay heavy, and so they didn't lend themselves to the voracious critiques which DeClasse would level against the prequels. And again, not without some reason. However, at least in Revenge of the Sith, its ambitious filmmaking merits, I think, when unconsidered by DeClasse, I understand the point of that review and its reviewers' personal artistic priorities, narrative, traditionalism, essentially what Star Wars 77 represents. And no, Revenge of the Sith is not that. George Lucas didn't want it to be. If anyone didn't want to make another typical Star Wars film at this time, it was George Lucas. He had done it more than once, he pioneered it, he witnessed it change culture and observed as many knockoffs and derivative blockbuster wannabes following in the wake of it. Attempts at realizing fantastical worlds and impossible space operas would abound, but only with Lucas's funding could he re-establish the form as a thing to be reckoned with. 1999's The Phantom Menace was what it was, although ultimately Attack of the Clones and even Revenge of the Sith to some extent found themselves competing or at least sharing the monopoly on cinematic world-building wonder with Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, the Harry Potter film adaptations, and eventually many superhero characters on the big screen from Spider-Man, X-Men, Hulk, Batman and Superman came again, and eventually that whole MCU thing. By the time the Star Wars saga had ended at 6 films, remember that time? It was still hanging on as a Clone Wars animated series, premiering as a 2008 feature, which I saw at the cinema actually, and then going for 5 seasons. I saw the first season, ended with bounty hunters kidnapping a senator, maybe the Chancellor, I don't think so though. I didn't consider that season very strong, didn't continue. Apparently it got better, but it also introduced Darth Maul's survival, his brother, and fan-fiction-y nonsense, so I didn't bother returning. And then 2009 saw Avatar, which was a big deal, live action and digital animation fused together at last. Well, George Lucas kind of accomplished this with Revenge of the Sith in 2005, no? Avatar was what it was, although the disdain for Lucas and the prequel trilogy led all to dismiss his technological precedents to James Cameron's later work. I don't dislike the subsequent Star Wars sequel trilogy. Well, Rise of Skywalker was terrible, and I didn't bother with that Solo movie. I don't like that Mandalorian cutscene pseudo-cinematic TV trite, and I won't spend time with any of these other Star Wars spin-off shows unless someone aggressively insists to me exceptions. Hey, that initial 2003 Clone Wars cartoon was sensational. I had those on DVD. I adored those tremendously, arguably superior to the prequels. And I am so glad they have had a revival and appraisal, with it being cited as encapsulating everything that audiences and Star Warsists both love, or just hate, about the prequel trilogy. You know, it is easy to forget how prominent the Star Wars prequel mythology, the Clone Wars and all that, was for a period between 2002 and 2006/7. It was a potent realm to set media within: comics, shows, video games, and potentially a film. I loved the Clone Wars mythos when I was young. I loved the Empire/Rebels conflict too, the Galactic Civil War era, and there was plenty, or well enough, media in that realm, such as the Rogue Squadron trilogy on Nintendo 64 and GameCube, as well as lots of media being set after the original trilogy, essentially continuing its aesthetic tendencies. Now, the prequels are kind of seen as a joke, and I understand why. George Lucas had so much control over them that they reveal how potentially out of touch he was when attempting to realize a kids' movie, a serious Star Wars fan experience, and an achievement which film critics couldn't ignore, all at once, or separately at different times. He had more control and less people giving him advice here than he had on the original trilogy. Even when we praise the original trilogy, as much as I love Return of the Jedi, it is mainly for aesthetic and production reasons. It has a screenplay with similar issues as people have made of the prequel screenwriting, and it reeks of Lucas's commercial cynicism. Remember, ROTJ wrapped up a prospective 6-part saga in the first place, a sequel saga, you understand. Lucas was wrapping up a divorce case and wanted to spend more time with his kids, raising a family, and so some Ewok money, action figures for every creature in Jabba's palace, more and more spaceship designs. Though those, and of course the creature designs, are always appreciated, we can see this for what it is. Star Wars is a fun and flexible place for space opera warfare and intergalactic quests to take place, like a Dungeons & Dragons playground with the established archetypal classical quality of a Tolkien, or rather an Arthurian, mythos. Revenge of the Sith was one of the last times where a filmmaker attempted to usher in the culturally proposed utopic and euphoric 21st century rather than the one we occupy, the flat line, marred by brutish realities and pathological consequences 21st century. James Cameron's Avatar in 2009 attempted to convince us that the present was amazing because you could view Avatar. George Lucas's Revenge of the Sith tried to excite the world, look at what we can build from here. Except the filmmaking community, especially and even those with similar funds, such as James Cameron, didn't. Cameron designed and realized Pandora, not solely, but oversaw. One world, Revenge of the Sith features several. Pandora feels like a theme park simulation ride. Revenge of the Sith is rooted in and elevates further cinematic intuition via a digital coalescence. Avatar sought to bring video game cutscene aesthetics to the silver screen with a bit more monetary backing, although he lost sight of cinema, more so than George Lucas had. I will revisit Avatar again someday, a film which Noel Oakeshott claimed was almost provocatively simplistic aesthetically. This wouldn't be seen as an endorsement or an expression of excitement toward Avatar, but possibly an observation which most accurately defines it in relation to Revenge of the Sith. James Cameron wanted everyone to love Avatar, and its insecurities are naked. George Lucas didn't care with Revenge of the Sith. He made the movie he wanted to make, knowing that no one would care. He cared about his audience with The Phantom Menace, 5-year-old children, was terrified of his audience with Attack of the Clones, 20-something Gen X acolytes of his own creations, and with Revenge of the Sith he felt, I'm going to do whatever I want, I'm going to impress myself, and I don't care what anyone else thinks of it, because they aren't going to care either. And he was right. They didn't care. They enjoyed it as a Star Wars film, those who would claim to care, although the wider cinematic landscape, those who really tried to care about the medium, they weren't really interested. Mr. Lucas, as one of your intended prepubescents who was enchanted by one of your films at a cinema showing, I don't know if I ever would have stepped into caring more about the medium, or about Star Wars in general, therefore, than the medium, as a subsequent endeavour, if it weren't for reviewing Revenge of the Sith at that time. I want George Lucas to know that I was the audience he had in mind for Revenge of the Sith, and yes, I would say that it worked. We can laugh and mock screenplay faults. It makes it easier to criticize films because we can identify rules that they don't follow. It feels comfortable to have set targets which we mock until the end of time. It makes us feel unified, or even potentially smart. Although if your next door neighbour came into you with this, Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith, and you had never seen it before, you viewed it, you sat down with it, there were no cultural preconceptions, this was just a film that your next door neighbour had made, preconceptions, expectations, or concerns, you might be viewed as an idiot, then yes, you would be impressed. You would ask them how they did it, and you would expect everyone else to be as enchanted by it as you had. It's maybe fun to criticize bad acting, but do you really dislike bad acting, or do you just like agreeing with a lot of people about a thing? Revenge of the Sith, I thank you. And to you all, thanks for sitting through this, if you could. I hope everyone is as well as can be. Have a most perfect day, night, wherever you are, and thanks again. I may return to this subject one day in a synodelia. I know this film is the crux of a certain futurist film philosophy expressed by a friend, and discussing that with them would be extraordinarily fascinating. Anyway, thanks again everyone.